If reading feels exhausting, frustrating, or confusing, there's a reason for that. And it doesn't have to do with effort, laziness, or intelligence. Hello, I'm Rebecca, the Reading Hacker, and I help struggling readers crack the code and work towards confidence in reading. All right, time for a belief shift here. I know that we've been told that being a good reader means that we are super smart, but actually, reading has nothing to do with intelligence. I know many of us think that if someone's a good reader, they must be really intelligent and smart. But actually, that's not the case. Intelligence has very little impact on being able to read because reading is not natural. It's something that needs to be taught. Speaking doesn't have to be taught. If a child is put around a bunch of people who are talking, they'll eventually learn to talk. It's actually one of our developmental milestones that we kind of watch for if a child struggles and is not speaking at least their first word by 1, or the language explosion that happens at 2. So reading is definitely something that many people struggle with. Actually, about 15 to 20% of the population has significant struggles with reading. It's so common that most people know somebody who's a struggling reader. Reading breaks down in 3 ways, and this all comes from something called the simple view of reading. It's a math formula. Now, don't go running for the hills if you don't like math. You're not going to need a calculator for this. Basically, it comes down to word recognition times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. Both sides of the equation are necessary for reading to happen. If one is a struggle, it's going to impact the final product. Let's break those down. The first one is word recognition. This includes phonics, phonological awareness, which is that manipulating of different kinds of sounds, and something called orthographic mapping, which is being able to read at the speed of sight, right? That's like one area that can really impact somebody's reading. Part 2 of the breakdown comes the language comprehension. And language comprehension is what it sounds like, understanding the language that you're hearing, that you're listening to, whether it's in your head or through your ears. This includes vocabulary, background knowledge, figurative language, and something called syntax, which is basically the word order of our language. Okay. Those who struggle with language comprehension are some of those kids who can read like a dream, beautiful, 130, 150 words a minute. They can just read, but they don't understand a single thing that they are reading. And for those of us who are neurodivergent, like myself, sometimes we'll read through a whole paragraph and go, what did we just read? So it comes down to a lot of issues in that realm. Now, the third way that reading can break down was something called fluency. I tend to call this the Wi-Fi of reading. Some people use the word bridge. I like the word Wi-Fi. Kind of like the Bluetooth. It's between word recognition and language comprehension. It kind of connects the two. And it actually has 3 parts. A lot of people focus on the rate, the speed. And yes, speed is something that is important because you want your brain to be reading at the speed of sight. So you're not overloading and having to do 2 or 3 things at once in your head. The human brain really doesn't like doing 2 or 3 things at once, even though most of us like to multitask. But that's only one part of fluency. The 2 other parts are, one is prosody, and that is reading with natural expression. And the last part is accuracy. It's really hard to understand what you're reading if you don't read the words correctly. I think what's really also important to put out there is that most struggling readers are not struggling because the lack of effort or lack of motivation. Most of them are struggling because they need either more practice with what they've been taught, or they really haven't been taught the way that they need to be taught. So I think that's something that we really need to kind of reflect on our practices when we're looking at that. Some people need a lot more repetitions for it to stick. I think we also need to talk about the emotional cost when it comes to being a struggling reader. The shame that a lot of us feel. It doesn't just affect the schoolwork. When you struggle for a very long time with reading and you have failure after failure after failure, it starts to affect how you see yourself. Now, I definitely believe that failure can be some of the best teacher. But if you continually face failure, you tend to lose that grit. So I think what we really need to keep in mind is that when we have students who are, and this can be any age, when we have students who are really struggling, that the emotional cost is really there, both for the student, the family involved, the teacher who's teaching, the school, everybody trying to figure out why this child is struggling. And when it comes down to it, we really need to look at those 3 reasons as to why, because that's going to tell us exactly how we're going to go about helping. I like to connect it to this, and in no way is any of this saying that you can diagnose. Schools are not meant to diagnose, and parents should diagnose as well, and tutors as well. But I kind of think of it like this. If you were to go to a doctor and say, "Doctor, I have a sore throat," he'd ask you, "What other kind of symptoms do you have?" And then they would decide what medication to give you based on those. If you went to a doctor and said, "Doctor, I don't feel well," and they said, "Here's some pills, you're good," you would question that. We need to make sure that the intervention that we are giving students, our kids, and everybody who are struggling with readers matches what they are struggling with. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels in the mud, and that mud turns into shame for our kids and older adults. As a teacher or as a parent or as someone who knows somebody who's struggling reading, you might be thinking, what did I do wrong? What are we doing wrong? The question needs to be, what are we doing right, and what do we need to keep doing right? How does this person need to be taught? Remember, this isn't because of effort or intelligence. It's a matter of skill and repetition. If you're wondering where to even start with all this, because a simple view of reading doesn't seem so simple, down below I have a parent-friendly checklist that you can use to help guide a conversation with your education provider. Now, homeschool parents, I did not forget about you either. Down below, there's one for some reflection on the curriculum and what you're doing at home. Please feel free to use these to help guide your conversations. The checklist is simple, actionable, and is meant to help provide clarity for families moving forward. When you have clear information and the right tools, reading becomes attainable. 95% of all people can learn to read. So let's work together to crack the code and unlock the reader.